Hello, welcome to Tech Talk with Steve. I'm your host, Steve Cowles with AEM Test, and today is our RCDD Roundtable. What we've done is we've put together a special show today. I've got a couple guests that are going to be joining me, and the idea is we're going to talk about things that the three of us have seen over the decades, showing my age a little bit, that we've been in the industry, changes we've seen, some challenges we've seen, and how we might overcome some of those things. And we'll see where this takes us. It should be an interesting conversation. So the first guest I'm going to introduce is Chuck Bowser. And Chuck has done just about everything in our industry, from being a self-described cable monkey to a designer to a Bixie trainer. He hosts his own video podcast, Let's Talk Cabling, and has a weekly live stream called After Hours Live, both of which focus on providing education to our industry peers. He also conducts RCDD study classes, all of this in addition to his day job. Chuck holds the Bixie, RCDD, and Tech credentials. Welcome, Chuck.
Thank you, Mr. Steve. Good to see you, my friend.
Good to see you too. The next guest that I'm bringing on is Marv Evans. Marv is president at Xactec in Williamsburg, Virginia. Marv has an extensive background in electronics and RF from his service in the U.S. Coast Guard, in addition to his expertise in our industry from the many years he's been involved with the low voltage cabling market. Marv holds the Bixie RCD credential. Welcome, Marv.
Good morning. Welcome.
Oh, I think Marv's muted. Oh, there he is. We just got a little delay there, Marv. No problem.
Okay. Glad to be here.
We'll work with delays. As RF guys, we know about propagation delay. We know we can get a delay in the video and audio, so we're good. We can overcome. So what I'd like to do is Marv, why don't you tell us a little bit about what Xactec does, what you do with Xactec, and what part of our industry you're most heavily engaged in.
We're in the small to medium-sized market in southeastern Virginia. And so our clients are primarily contractors, property managers, architects, electricians. So we're a design, build, construction firm. I consider what we do, we deliver presence products. So video surveillance, access control, conference rooms, and those type of things for hotels and apartment buildings, offices in a commercial environment. And so we do the cradle to grave design, build all the way through testing and certification.
Great. And Chuck, so I kind of teed up a lot of your experience in the intro, but what's your day job now? You don't have to mention who you work for if you don't want to, but what do you do in your daily capacity?
So from my 8 to 5 job, I'm a certified trainer for a manufacturer. Goes out and trains the contractors to install copper and fiber systems.
Great. And of course, most people know, if you've attended Tech Talk, you know that I'm product manager with AEM. I've been involved in test for 20 years. The reason that I wanted to kind of put this show together with three of us that are all RCDDs is we come from varied backgrounds. And, Marv obviously is daily involved in the design side of our industry. He's engaged in that heavily. Chuck has done that more recently than I have. It's been over 20 years since I've actually done any design work. Once I got into the test and measurement side of our market, I was really focused more on that and wasn't doing anything with regard to design. So we all come from a little different backgrounds, but we all have the same goal in mind. We want to make sure that what's being installed in our industry is done correctly. We want to make sure that it's going to provide the capacity for that end user to transmit the data that they need for their daily functions. So that's kind of why we're here. So we discussed a few things ahead of time to kind of tee up some conversation here, and I'd like to bring up a couple things and we can then discuss it. So one thing I'd like to know is what are the pros and cons from the experience of you, Marv, and you, Chuck, of working for either an electrician, a general contractor, an owner, architect. Is one of these easier to deal with or better as far as you're concerned, or just different And what are some of the challenges you have in those kind of situations?
So I'll take this one first, since I've got experience of working for electrical contractors and stuff. In our industry, when you look at low voltage installers, there's been a movement over the last probably 15, 20 years where there's electricians also getting into low voltage. So the opportunity to work for electricians isn't as prevalent as it used to be in the past. If I'm given a choice of being contracted with an electrician or being contracted with the end user, my preference is going to be with the end user, because the end user has the final say on everything. They're the ones that pay the bill. If you need to get that second conduit put in that room, the electricians, they'll tell you, no, we that's all we bid. But if you go to the end user and you say, look, we need that extra conduit because you moved to Cat 6A cable, which has bigger outside diameter, which means I need more pathway space, they're going to have to pay the electricians, but they'll force electricians to put in that extra conduit. So my preference has always been to work for the end user. Now, on the downside of that, working for the end user, you're not part of the whole bid process. If it goes through the AIA process where you have the divisions of work, right? That whole process is geared so that the customer will go to the general contractor to get a ballpark price so they can secure financing for their job. Well, until Division 27, we weren't part of that process, so we were an afterthought. So we're never part of the whole design process. So that's the downfall of working for the end user, because you show up and you're the redheaded stepchild because you're working directly for the owner, not for the GC. So right. They kind of look at you like they sneer at you because they don't have any control over you. You're the wild child of the bunch.
Gotcha. Marv, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I'm kind of inclined to the opposite in that if I can be involved working for the owner rather than the architect in the design stage, and we get an established design, because the architects, so much of what we do in our industry is discretionary and it's preference and those kind of things. And so if we can get the design into the project in the beginning, after that, I'd rather work for the electrician and get that synergy between us and the electrician, where we can just say we need a pathway. Where if you're working for the owner and you say we need a pathway, then he says I need a change order. But if you can get your design into the contract documents, then you're part of the team of the electrician and the GC and the other trades, and you're not so inclined to have them call you up on Wednesday and say, hey, we're closing the walls on Friday, so we need you to finish.
Yeah, they'll be a little more courteous to your needs.
Yeah. And you get invited to the contractor meetings and those kind of things. So if it's a well-run thing, I'd rather be in on the design on the front and part of the construction team on the back end.
So kind of a little bit of both, where you're engaged with that owner and the architect up front to get what you need into those drawings instead of everything being an afterthought.
Mm-hmm.
Exactly.
Yeah, I've always had good working relationship with electricians on site, because I learned a trick a long, long time ago. Your first day on the job site, you go around and introduce yourself to all of the foremen for every of the trades. You introduce yourself to the guy who leads the electrician, the guy who leads the HVAC work. And it doesn't hurt if you find out in advance what is their favorite beer and bring them a 6-pack. Then they work along with you really well.
Yeah. So, Marv, I know this one's kind of for you. I know that you're involved in trying to work to integrate PoE lighting into what you guys offer, but you've found some interesting challenges when it comes to dealing with, the GCs and the architects and electricians. Can you elaborate on that a little bit?
Yeah, in fact, I don't really have an answer to this, but I've been real excited about the particularly the PoE lighting, but the smart buildings in general. And it's a technology that's a no-brainer. But when you bring it out to the street, the electricians with a longer history, the older electricians, they have a proven solution, and they're not really anxious for this revolutionary new product, and it threatens them some because they really have to learn a new platform. They do struggle some. I've talked to them, and they struggle with the younger electricians that are joining the field, aren't anxious about doing the same thing for the next 20 or 30 years. And so they have a bit of a problem. At the same time, change their. And so it's almost they see an opportunity to go into a different type of electrical work in the lighting and stuff, but the traditional electricians aren't that inclined to do it. It's surprising how many architects and MEPs that I've run into who've said, "Oh, I've never heard of POE lighting." So they have traditional proven solutions, even though they use LED lighting, and they kind of conflate the two, between difference between POE lighting and LED lighting. And so there's this cultural thing. I also found it quite interesting that some electricians have relationships with lighting distributors, and these lighting distributors are very territorial. And I've been told that if they advertise a lighting package and the electricians challenge that at all, they'll get blacklisted by the lighting distributors, and then they're in big trouble.
Wow.
And so they're very hesitant to take on this new stuff because the lighting distributors, they're into the traditional lighting. So there's this whole mesh of challenges from a cultural point of view.
Interesting.
To adopting the POE lighting. We go to the Bisky conference, and everything works and everything's fine and everything, and then you get in the real world and say, "Hey, I got an idea where all you have to do is run blue wires to your lights and everything will work." And they'll say, "Nah, not so fast."
Yeah, but this is a tale as old as time, right? There's always been early adopters and late adopters. I remember early in my career, I had to write a financial paper to my boss on why we should have company emails. And now look at us, right? We can't survive that emails. I did an interview, I guess about 6 months to a year ago, of a lady who works at this firm. And they did what's called digital electricity at a hotel. And there's lots of benefits from doing this. You don't have to put in the pathways for the heavy electrical. It's, to save a lot of costs, save a lot of infrastructure. There's a lot of advantages here, but there's always going to be those saying, well, we're not sure about that four pair wiring. And when you look at, there's always been an animosity between electricians and low voltage people, right? They think we're pulling that small little 4-pair cable, and that's sissy cable. But when you look at it, it's pretty complex stuff. So they're used to pulling the big bulky conductors. We only have 2 or 3 conductors to them, and here ours has 8 conductors in the 4-pair cabling and even more. So there's always been that adoption. And when you look at the low voltage industry, right? Especially, and I think you hit the nail on the head. It's the younger people, because I'm part of Low Voltage Nation, and they're always talking about POE and stuff like that. I'm telling you, that is the future. If you want to survive into the next 10, 15 years, and you're an electrical company, you better start thinking about this, and you better start making plans for this process. And the low voltage people, we're already there. We're wanting to do this. It's just the key is.
I think it's more prevalent in the major metropolitan areas where we have some more of this stuff, and we're in the small, medium kind of rural markets. And so what I part younger electricians, and it's particularly good if you have second generation electricians who take over from their dad or something like that, so they have an established electrical firm. Because I would suspect it will be a challenge, at least in the small markets, to start your electrical business from a POE background, and, to get your foot in the door. So you kind of need to persuade an existing electrical firm to partner with, or to get you in the door. Because the other challenge is if you come in to a project competing with electricians for the lighting package, the architects and owners always look to electricians and say, "Does that make sense? Will that work? Will that do the same?" And so, because electricians have a lot of credibility on the job site,
mm-hmm.
and they carry a lot of weight. So if you get them in there poo-pooing you, it just creates the struggle even more. So I've kind of turned my direction towards some younger electricians.
Yeah, and depending on where you are regionally too, yeah, in some parts of the country, even low voltage cabling, you have to have a licensed electrician as part of the crew for that installation. But there are some areas where it's not required, and we start talking about PoE, the cabling for PoE lighting. That's low voltage cabling. And some electricians in these markets where it's not required to have an electrician to pull low voltage see it as a threat to their work. So you're fighting kind of that battle too. So you kind of have to help them see the light, no pun intended, that it is the future. So
Well, the key is to get a customer. You got to explain to them, how them understand how their decision is either going to cost them more money or save them more money. And then in this scenario, you really want to focus in on showing them how they're going to save money by not having to build the infrastructure, not having to put in the big bulky heavy cables and stuff. But you're right, you hit the nail on the head, Dave. Especially in the union heavy areas, it's an uphill battle.
Yeah,
it's an absolute uphill battle.
Absolutely. Which you're talking about cost a little bit. So this kind of leads into the next topic here. Construction, it tends to operate on a smaller margin than a lot of other technology related companies. And it's created some challenges, Marv, that you've mentioned, you've seen out there in the field. You care to comment on that?
No, yes, I will. I see my audio is having a problem with a lot of people. Is it showing up?
It's crackling a little bit. And it's dropped out occasionally. It might be a Wi-Fi connection.
Yeah, I'm in a hotel in Charlottesville, Virginia. But yes, the margins are tricky in the construction industry as well, and so one way we try to sell the whole PoE thing partly is the savings and those kind of things, about how it may be comparable going into it, although we've partnered with PoE Texas, and people are familiar with them, and they have some good sales materials so far as the savings on that end. But the construction costs are a little bit different in a non-technical customer, when we just have apartment buildings and hotels and things like that don't value the higher end technology quite so much, and a lot of the things that we're getting out of our new infrastructures, the Cat 6A and Cat 6 cabling and stuff, for the most part, a lot of it worked fine with Cat 5, and so they specify the Cat 6, but they don't really need it for what they're doing, and so we find that sometimes the job will spec Cat 6, but people will actually deliver Cat 5, but the system works fine, and so they come in with a different product, but the margins are different. Maybe you can explain it better than I can, but they kind of do a substitution.
Yeah. So
they end up achieving the goal because the demands of the project aren't like the folks that are doing data centers and things like that.
Right. So it sounds like, in that situation, you've got somebody who, they spec Cat 6 on the job. Somebody puts 5E in instead. And while 5E might work for that application that they're currently running, it may not work for something down the road that they might intend on running over it. And of course, with electrical, you're going to have an inspection. And if you don't have the right wiring in to handle the current that is rated for that circuit, that's going to fail the inspection. But for a Cat 5e versus a Cat 6, unless there's a superintendent on the job who's going in and looking at what you're pulling in, it all is going to come down to the test you run at the end. Now, if they're looking for and this kind of leads us into a discussion a little bit about certification, but if they're looking for a certification test on Cat 6 and you've got 5e in there, you're going to have a problem, because it's unless it's really, really good 5e, it's probably not going to pass a Cat 6 test, even on a short run. And you run into issues with compatibility between different types of connectors and cables. If you put 5e cable and you know, a Cat 3 jack or Cat 6A cable and a Cat 5E jack, those kind of things, they all start to cause problems too, and not just with the weakest link causing it to fail because it's not rated for that same category of cabling system, but you have issues with mismatches that create return loss problems on the cable too. So that can affect the test, and it all, I guess it depends on that scope of work too. What test did they call out? You know,
Yeah,
is it
in one way
they just want a wire map test? Is it just a plug and my computer works? My computer hits the network. Is that my test? Then you might be okay.
Yeah, the one way we combat that is when we submit our bid, we highlight those parts of the spec that it will be certified. You know, it will be, you know, the Cat 6 components all the way through and those kind of things. And we do that partly to encourage them to check that the other bids they're getting are doing the same thing. You know, if the project calls for an RCDD, then we make a point of saying that we have one. Because in the smaller markets, to highlight portions of the spec that we think will differentiate us, and like that is that, you know, the spec calls for Cat 6 or 6A, and you know, we'll certify it and all those kind of things. So that's kind of how we address those issues.
Yeah, and it's dangerous if these guys are out there, they're low bidding it because they know they're going to use, you know, a sub par or a product that's below what was specified when they do the actual install, because they could withhold payment if they go and inspect this and they say, hey, you're supposed to be putting in Cat 6 cable, that's what's called out in the scope of work, and you've put 5E in. That contractor could be hanging out to dry. I see Chuck nodding his head. Yeah.
Oh yeah. If the contract language stipulates category 6A cable and you put in 5E, you are legally liable to have to go back and replace it with what the contract called. And I've done lots of retrofits. I'm gonna tell you right now, it's a lot easier to install the cable during new construction as opposed to retrofitting it.
Yeah.
And when you're going back in, here's the funny thing about estimates, right? When an estimator estimates a bid, they bid putting the cable in one time, testing that cable one time. Having to go back and redo that work is not in the bid, so that's coming directly out of the profit of the construction firm. And I like the fact that Mark pointed this out, and a lot of people don't know this. The construction industry, the profit margin is between 3 and 5% of a job. Oof. That's how narrow it is. Now they bank on the fact that they can get change orders and stuff like that on the backside, but 3 to 5%. That's a slim margin. That's one mistake on one line of an estimate.
Yeah, and a lot of the jobs that we do, there may be a low voltage person in the MEP. Oftentimes there's not. A lot of these MEP firms don't have low voltage people. The MEP writes the spec, and that's the last time anybody ever verifies the spec, because it goes out, and because the architects don't know anything about our field, and even the submittals, you submit submittals, and quite often they'll say, you know, if you're the expert, if that'll work, then do it. And
another bad thing too, Marv. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you. I apologize, Marv.
Okay.
Another bad thing is, especially when you have not an RCDD involved in this process, and I'm sure you're not like this, but there are other consulting firms. They copy and paste from a previous bid into the new bid, and none of it applies, or it's outdated, or they reference the 568.1A standard. We're in the E standard now, guys. Come on, right? So there's those kinds of mistakes that would just drive a contractor absolutely bonkers.
Yeah. So I don't mean to poo-poo our, you know, what we do in construction, because because I love it, because we have creative freedom. We're kind of the special animals on the job site. We do something that nobody else understands. And so, although I've said some kind of negative things, you know, about the thing, it's also very exciting, because the things that we do is the icing on the cake of, you know, any jobs. You know, the people just assume the lights are going to work, but when the audio works, you know, well, and the doors and all those kind of things work by schedule and stuff, we do the kind of things that the owner, that really makes the owners proud of their product, and that's exciting.
Yeah.
Yeah. Now, we were talking a while back, Marv. You had a weird situation where somebody actually came in and wanted you to wire nut some cabling.
Yes, we work for electricians quite often, and sometimes they'll try to take a piece of the pie and run their own cable and just have us terminate. And so we did this at a like a pet resort, and he called us up and he said, we've created 2 more IDFs from the plans. And we said, that's kind of odd. What do you mean? And they said, well, it was kind of tricky to run the cable all the way, so we just cut it, and we're gonna use wire nuts, like we do with the other stuff, and we just need you to tie it up somehow. And we said, that's, it doesn't quite work that way. But when Chuck and I were talking, he's run into that kind of thing before. And so we ended up putting in a 110 block, but of course it didn't pass Cat 6 after that. But those are the kind of things that we do. As Chuck was saying, the electricians are starting to move into the low voltage, and they treat cables the same way they treat the 12 and the 14 gauge cables.
Yeah. It's there are a lot of good electricians out there that do their due diligence when it comes to low voltage cabling. They recognize that it's an additional revenue stream for them, so they're taking the time to learn to do things properly. But you're going to run into some out there that don't grasp it yet. And it's amazing because, electricians have been involved in this for decades. So it's not like it's new. So, but you're going to run into a case where they may treat it like an electrical cable. I had somebody years ago call me up, and they had a cable that was failing crosstalk. Every single cable in their install was failing crosstalk. I asked them how they terminated, asked them, did you maintain your pair twist up to the point of termination? Yeah, I did all that. I said, okay, walk me through it. And they said, after we punched down, we had 2 feet of cable left over. So I folded it up into the box, pushed the plate on, and screwed the plate down. And I go, okay. I go, it's not Romex, right? You can't fold it up. And I told them, to cut off the excess, re-terminate properly without, folding up any cable. And I said, call me back after you've done a couple of these and tested them. They never called back, but I knew what the answer was because they were spending the next 2 days re-terminating everything. So you have to treat it differently. One last thing that I'd like to bring up here is, we talked a little bit about low voltage is not as heavily permitted or tied to bank funds as some of the other trades, the framer, sheetrockers, mechanical. What kind of challenges has that created that you've seen out there, Marv?
Interestingly enough, it for a lot of jobs, it essentially takes us off the critical path. And so we're not kept on the calendar as well as, so it's up to us to keep connected so that we stay engaged. We talked earlier about how we will occasionally say, okay, we're closed. We've decided to close up the walls because we got the inspection. So you need to finish, in 2 days. And at least in Southeastern Virginia, you mentioned some other places, but in Southeastern Virginia, most of these localities here, the things we do, it isn't permitted. It isn't inspected. There's no code requirements, those kind of things, unless you're talking about egress and those type of things, or fire alarms. and because of what we do, isn't tied to the release of bank funds. It isn't tied to building inspection, those kind of things. The onus is on us to really keep our nose to the project progress, so that we ask the questions. Because if we say nothing, they'll do the mechanical, electrical, and close up the walls, and then we're left pulling cables with closed walls. And as Chuck said, it's much easier to put the cable, do the wiring when the building's open than when it's all done. And so those are interesting challenges where when you work for the owner, somehow those are kind of mitigated because the owner's about the money, and the people on the job site are just about building. They don't, a lot of times the people who are actually doing the work don't really think much about the bank part of it. and the superintendent and those and whatnot. But so I think the main thing is because we're so often not on the critical path of the project, that we just kind of float along unless we consciously stay connected. And like Chuck said, so when we start a job, we introduce ourselves to the sheetrock foreman and the mechanical, in the mechanical foreman, electrical foreman, make sure they have our cards and say, hey, you got any kind of questions, or if if you don't see a bunch of blue wires, give us a call, just so we can tell you, yeah, we're done with that floor, or we're done with that space, or whatever, and that works out well. I haven't yet bought a beer pizza, but that's a good idea. I might try that in the future.
Yeah.
On that more than one occasion. On the flip side of the bank financing thing that bites customers on the back end is, because we weren't part of the whole, like I said, the whole bank drawing process, because they don't think about it, they can think, oh, it's just cable. How expensive can that be? And then when they see the price to put in that category 6, category 6A, the fiber backbone and all that, now they got to go get other funding for that thing, or it's got to come out of their budget. And then on top of that, they lose, the beautiful thing about getting the financing with, through the bank is that's amortized across a period of time, right? Well, if they have to go get separate financing, that's harder for them to get that amortization schedules. So,
Right.
because they don't think about the pricing, because it's just cable. We're not just cable anymore. We're not POTS cabling. This is high performance data cabling, and it costs money to put it in. And we have our professionals are not cheap putting it in.
Yeah. And a lot of our cabling, because it's smaller, it can get pinched behind a sheetrock and nobody notices. And so our goal is to try to catch that early enough that we can find it. And unfortunately, with AEM's test equipment, we can pretty well guess where the crush is happening, and that's critical. So, kind of leading into the certification stuff, we don't certify just when it's in the spec. We certify everything, and we sell it to them if they ask for it. But for our own purposes, we certify it, and that's partly because people move in a new place, and they say our system doesn't perform very well, doesn't work very well, and they think the only part that can fail is your cabling. And they figure they're in a new building, so everything should run fine, everything should run fast. And so it's very helpful to have AEM's test results to say, yeah, it may not be performing the way you want, but it's not the infrastructure. And we didn't used to do that, but that saved us a lot of time, because you show them these reports, and they don't know what they mean, but they got color and they got grass and they look nice and everything. And so you can hand it to them and say, we'll take a look, but if you're mistaken, we're going to charge you. Or you can look at this test result and look elsewhere first. Mm-hmm. And usually that sheet of paper sends them off in a different direction, and they say, oh yeah, we brought over an old switch, and actually it's a 100 meg switch, or it's a 100 meg switch, and that's really our problem. So the certification isn't just for the customer. It's also so that our techs can with confidence go to the superintendent and say, you may have a problem, but it's not us.
Yeah, and that same certifier you're using, Marv, you can also, if they still want you to come in and check it out, you can use the other functionality to test the PoE. You can test the switch. You can narrow down where the problem is. It might be a patch cord. Somebody swapped out a patch cord for something they picked up at the dollar store, or God forbid they put something like this piece of silver satin in into a link somewhere. I've seen it, so it can happen. One thing I did want to mention, we talked a little bit. I know we're running a little over. We're going to wrap up here in a second, but we were talking about, Chuck, you mentioned doing the copy and paste from a one spec to another, and they just keep repeating and they have mistakes. That's actually a fight that we fight on the certification tester side of things, because they've boilerplated this and they've got somebody else's tester in a spec. They copy it and paste it in and just run with it, rather than specifying that, your certification tester must be able to meet these standards and test to the standards. They just boilerplate it and put a brand name in there. So that's a fight too. And then you have to work with the architects to get added into the spec and things like that. So it's an ongoing battle.
Or, when they copy and paste those boilerplate stuff, they might be referencing a test or that manufacturer doesn't even service anymore.
Or the manufacturer might not exist anymore.
Right. Or they may not have a newer manufacturer on there who has a better solution. That's a bad thing about not doing your due diligence, right? Yeah. And the certification thing, that's one of my things I'm fighting as well too, because there's two types of contractors in this industry, and those are the get it and those that don't. And it's that simple. The ones that get it, they're going to certify that cable, whether they're getting paid to certify it or not. Now, we can talk about whether or not they, and I love that Marv mentioned this, we can talk about whether or not they sell those certification results to the customer or not, but at least they've got documentation. I got a list of 146 pro tips on my website, and pro tip number 1, document. Yep. It's even more important than pro tip number 2, which is communicate. Yep. Because if you document a bad conversation, you're better off than having a good conversation that you didn't document.
Exactly. Right? Yep.
So, and then when you test at a tester, you get certified. You've documented that the work that you did meets or exceeds the standards, that you're a professional, right? And the beautiful thing is, and the AEM does this as well, is if some new standard comes down the pike, if you say them test results, you can actually go back and look at that and apply the new standard to it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I've used that before, where they've said, well, that isn't the right tester, and we've said, what is it you're trying to certify to? And it's the same result. And so when push comes to shove, and you say the owner or something, have you got a lesser product? I mean, have you been harmed by the use of a different product? And they say, well, no, just that the MEP cites this. And then as the RCD person, and again, RCD in my mind doesn't necessarily make you smarter than the next guy. It just gives you credibility, so people think you're smarter. And so you can go to them and you can say, the reason they put that in there is because it was comfortable. It was a comfortable thing to put in there. It was a sure bet. But this other product is built to the same standard. It satisfies the same thing. So if you go push to shove with this thing, you're not going to be able to demonstrate that you are harmed any by the use of this other tester. It's just that your MEP was lazy in that they spec something that was convenient. It's like using Kleenex instead of tissue, right? Yeah. And so so we're very comfortable using it all the time. We've never had a problem with.
That's good to hear.
Results and it's presented really well. Like I said, it kind of razzle dazzles and it does the trick in the small and medium sized market. Maybe not. I don't know about data centers where you have, again, none of our customers are technical, and so so they rely on us to have that expertise. And AEM does a good job of really putting icing on the cake that we're not just wire map folks.
We appreciate that. A couple things before I wrap up here. One, we've one point of clarification, Chuck, on the recertification thing. We can recertify if they do like a Cat 6 or 5e and they meant to certify as a Cat 6, you can recertify that in the software. Recertifying to standards that aren't there yet, that's a whole different ballgame. That you're not going to be able to do. That would be nice though. I think you've just given me an idea to run past engineering. But that's going to require testing to higher frequencies as newer, higher standards come out. We've talked a lot today. We've talked about some challenges we've seen. We've mentioned challenges that are created by other organizations within the trades. MEPs, electricians, architects, everybody. Want to make it very clear that generally speaking, all of these professionals are fantastic in the industry. They all have their job due, they do their part, and generally speaking, they all do it very well. And it's, but there are exceptions, and we do see exceptions in the field where we get people doing this boilerplate copy and paste kind of thing that can lend to some of these problems. And There are some electricians who haven't adopted the low voltage, techniques yet, or they're not accepting of it. So, but generally speaking, I think everybody's professionals in industry, and for the most part, we see that everybody gets along. But there are exceptions that create these challenges out there in the field for us. So I'd like to thank both of you guys, Marv Evans from Xactec and Chuck Bowser of Let's Talk Cabling fame. Thanks for joining us. This has been very interesting for me. Hopefully it was interesting for all of our attendees. I see there's a lot of comments. I'll go through those and look for any questions. We'll try to address those directly. Would like to let everybody know our next Tech Talk with Steve is going to be August 2nd. It's going to be our 1-year anniversary of launching Tech Talk with Steve. So it's surprising that a year's gone by so fast, but it'll be the first of a 3-part series, and we'll have a special guest, Andrew Froelich, who was our very first guest a year ago. So again, thanks everybody for attending. Thanks Marv and Chuck for joining me today. Really appreciate your time.
Thank you, Steve.
Thank you.
All right. Bye
Good
now.
day.